Welcome back, everyone. My name is Pritesh here with Kaizen Crypto, bringing you another video. So here today, I've got an exciting one for you guys. We're going to be going through the process of building our Cardano Haskell node. So as far as staking and earning passive income when Shelly is launched on the Cardano mainnet, we're going to have our stake pool up and running on a bare metal server. So if you're interested in that type of content, be sure to stay tuned. Alright everyone, thank you so much for joining me here today. I hope you guys are all doing well. So to get things started, what we're talking about today is building out our Cardano Haskell node. Now right now we're currently running on the incentivized testnet using a ROC Pi 4. Now this has been a great experience to be able to learn on and figure out what exactly it's going to take to run a stake pool when Shelly is launched on mainnet. Now in order to bring out the best rewards for our delegators, what that means for us is upgrading to a bare metal server. So here in this video, we're going to be going through the process of putting it all together. Now, if you're interested in building your own Cardano stake pool, be sure to check out the links down in the description below. That way you can see all the hardware components that we use to put this build together. Also, if you do find some value from this content here today, be sure to smash that like button. If you're new to the channel and if you enjoy content like this, be sure to hit that subscribe button and click that notification bell so you can get notified when we post a new video. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. So we're here at the desk and laid out for you, I've got all of the hardware components that we're going to be using for this build today. Now the thought process that I had in mind for piecing these components together is that I wanted to make it run as optimally as possible while also keeping it very quiet. So this is going to be running as a server. It's going to be online 24/7. I'm going to have it in a home office setting, and I wanted to keep it where I don't really notice it as it's running. Now all of these hardware components were sourced from Amazon. If you did decide that you wanted to use any of these components in your own stake pool build, go ahead and check out the links down in the description below. So now getting started, what we're looking at here for the motherboard, I went with the ASRock B450M Pro 4. This came very highly rated from Amazon for our specific needs and running it as a server. I think this is going to provide enough performance. Also really like the form factor, it's a very compact motherboard. This is going to be compatible with the AMD Ryzen series processor. That's what I picked up here. This is the 2nd gen Ryzen 3. This comes standard built in with the Radeon graphics. It's a 4-core 3.6 gigahertz processor. For what we're using this for as a stake pool, I think that processor is going to provide more than enough performance. You could even get away with a lesser expensive processor, but I feel like for our budget that we are working with, this will do just fine and it'll pair perfectly with this motherboard. Now, talking about keeping this running as quiet as possible, so for the CPU cooler, I chose the Be Quiet DarkRock Pro 4 CPU cooler. This also came very highly rated as being efficient and very quiet for keeping this system cool. Now for the power supply, so I chose the Seasonic Focus. This is a 650 watts. Running this as a stake pool, this is what they had available. I think you could even get away with a 500 watt. This is going to do the job just fine. It has a 7-year warranty. Seasonic also came very highly rated. Talking a little bit also about the memory and the storage. This isn't something that you have to do necessarily. I happen to have this component available from the Cardano on the Rock stake pool kit. I didn't end up using it. This is the Lenovo PCIe M2 solid state drive. What I'm intending on using this for is storing the Ubuntu operating system. Not necessary, it's not required, but I think this will provide a faster experience when we start our stake pool. So now we also have, in order to store the blockchain, this is a standard SATA drive. This is a 2 terabyte Western Digital. Nothing fancy here. 2 terabyte, again, I think it's going to last for a very long time. You could even get away with 1 terabyte or even 500 gigabytes, whatever you can find. For the memory, this is where I went a little bit overboard. I think I went all out right here. So this is the HyperX Fury DDR4 RAM, 16 gigabytes for one stick. I've got 2 of these actually, so we're going to be running 32 gigabytes of memory. I think that's a bit overkill for running it as a stake pool. Like I was saying, a lot of these components is what I had available and that could fit my budget. So now you could even get away with lesser memory. I think you would need at least 4 gigabytes. But for what we're using here, this is what we've got. The HyperX Fury, we've got 2 of those. And then lastly, for the case, I know it might be kind of hard to see with the camera angle, but we're looking at a Fractal Design Mini C. This came very highly rated as well. Nice form factor, very compact. I think it's going to be perfect for what we're building. So now that we've taken a look at all the hardware components, now comes the fun part. Let's go ahead and put it all together. So to get things started, I went ahead and took the motherboard out of the box, and we're going to go ahead and install our M2 SSD. Now again, this isn't required, it's just something that I happen to have for this specific stake pool. Now one thing I did want to preface by saying is that before working on any of these electronic components, it's always a great idea to make sure that you are discharged from any type of static electricity. That's just to prevent any type of damage to any of these capacitors. It's just a general rule of thumb. So what you can do is you can wear one of those wristbands. That's an electrostatic wristband that'll actually discharge you, or you can actually just touch any metal object that's grounded nearby. So now, to get started, the M2 connector here on the motherboard, I'm going to see if I can just tilt that. That way you can see it right here. It's saying Ultra M2. That's where we're going to mount our solid state drive. I went ahead and took off the cover just so it's easier to see for you. So it's going to, and you'll be able to find the notches to see how it works. Just got to push that in and you'll hear it snap into place. Now what we'll do is, let's go ahead and put this cover back on. Let's see if it'll work with that. So that'll just slide right on it. And then we can see here that the hole that we're going to use to screw in, that's going to mount it to our motherboard. So I've got that here. Always nice to have magnetized screwdrivers, that is for sure. So that is done. So we've got the M2 attached. Let's go ahead and move on to the next step. So next thing for us to do, let's go ahead and take a look at the processor. So this is the AMD Ryzen. Let's go ahead and open this up here. You can see the processor, very nice. That's it right there. Now, interesting thing with this is that it actually came with its own CPU cooler. I think you could actually get away with this with no problem. It's specifically designed for this CPU. We're not going to be using this for this build just because I'm not entirely sure of how quiet it's going to run. But it does come with it. I really like that. But for this instance, let's go ahead and set that to the side. So this is the CPU. We'll just open this up from the plastic here. And it's going to go right where you see the cutout for the CPU. I'm just going to tilt this up right here. In order to put that in, there's this metal bar. We're just going to need to push that down and up. There's a little bracket that's holding it back. There we go. So we'll just lift that up. And as far as putting in the CPU, so you just want to make sure that you're handling this from the edges. Make sure you're not putting fingerprints on the top or the bottom. I'm just going to go ahead and flip it upside down like this. Just gently falls right out. Now, just to show you what we're looking at here, so how you want to line it up. I'm not sure if you can see it very well. I'm going to do my best to line up the camera. On the CPU, you can see that there's a little notch. There's a gold cutout right there. That is going to be what we're going to use to line up the CPU on the motherboard. So if you look on the motherboard, you'll see a corresponding notch that's going to match with that. Okay, and then once you've found the notch, you can just go ahead and gently place it down. There we go. And again, guys, we're not forcing anything here. We just want to make sure that everything just fits snugly. Once it's in, you can just go ahead and push down that metal bar, and that's it. The CPU has been installed. Alright, so next step, let's go ahead and take a look at the CPU cooler. Now, for this motherboard, in order to work with the CPU cooler that we have, there are 2 mounting brackets that are here. You want to make sure that you pay attention to the instructions that are meant for your specific motherboard. What it's requiring us to do in this instance is remove these 2 brackets because it's actually got 2 other brackets that we're going to use. So as we can see, this is some of the hardware that came with the CPU cooler. We're going to need to use those instead. So let's go ahead and start by first removing these brackets. I've got my Phillips head screwdriver here. I'm just going to gently loosen up these brackets. All right, now that we've unscrewed those brackets, let's go ahead and remove those. We'll no longer be needing these. So just hang on to them just in case, but those are done for now. Now, as far as the hardware that came with the CPU cooler, you're going to want to make sure it's specific to whether you're on an AMD processor or an Intel processor. This right here are the brackets that we'll be using for this AMD processor. And I'm just going to take a look at the instructions just real quick to see how it is that we're going to go about doing this. So it's saying here we're going to need these screws mounted on top. Now with this bracket, it's going to be dependent on the model of the motherboard that you have. So now that we've got those mounting brackets fixed on, I'm just going to go back over the screws and just tighten them up a little bit. I typically like to just mount it down before I do all the tightening. So let's go ahead and just give those a nice tightening. Just make sure they're snug, not too tight. Here we go. Okay, so that's pretty much done. We've changed out the mounting brackets for the CPU cooler. The next step, we're going to need to take a look at this CPU cooler. Alright, so this is pretty massive. Now, in order to get this fixed on, we're going to need some of the thermal paste. I'm going to grab some of that. So now, with applying the CPU thermal paste, they've went ahead and provided this along with the CPU cooler. This little syringe is what's going to have this thermal paste. Now, we don't really need to apply a whole lot. This applicator is typically enough for maybe about 1 or 2 uses. What we're going to do is just put a little dime size here at the middle of the CPU. And you just want to spread it around nice and evenly. You don't want it to be too globby. Just go ahead and do your best to just spread that around nice and evenly. It doesn't have to be perfect. And I like to concentrate it more so in the center, just so that way it can spread out more evenly. Alright, there we go. That should be just fine. So I'm going to set this thermal paste down to the side. And now the next thing for us to do is go ahead and grab our CPU cooler. So I'm going to take this off, and it's saying that there is actually a protective covering on the underside of the cooler. So that's this right here. We're going to have to peel this plastic off. There we go. This is going to allow the CPU cooler and the CPU to actually make contact. Now it's saying that you want to position the cooler mounting bridge centrally on the cooler. So let's go ahead and do that here. I'm just going to set this down. So there's a little slot right in here. So that actually has to be parallel here with these brackets. This fan is going to be pointed towards you. It's going to be where the RAM slots are. So we're just going to gently set this down. We want to make sure that it's aligned as perfectly as possible when we set this down. Okay, just keeping that very, very steady. And you'll be able to feel the contact with the thermal paste on the CPU. Just try not to slide it around too much, just so that way the thermal paste can stay where it's at. Now the next thing for us to do, let's go ahead, and it's saying we have to unscrew these two up at the top. So these are actually just caps. So these caps are going to be what we're going to use to close up this when we have to go to bolt it. How that's going to look, see, we've got this screwdriver. This actually came with this kit. We'll be able to feed the screwdriver down, and we'll be able to connect to the mounting bracket. So that's how that's going to look. Let's go ahead with the hardware that they've provided. So this is that bracket. This is what's going to go horizontally here over the mounts for the CPU. And the way they have this is just going to go right through the middle down here. And you'll see the holes. You just want to line those up. There we go. Okay. Now what we'll do, they've provided hardware. We've got a screw with a washer. So that will be positioned where the hole is on the bracket, if I don't break it first. Okay, and once we've got it positioned in the hole, I'm going to do that for the next one now. Here we go. Guys, forgive me if my head is in the way. I'm just trying to get a vantage point. Okay, so we've got those two. What we're going to do next is we're going to connect them to that bracket using the long screwdriver that they've provided. So we've got those caps taken off from the top of the cooler. We can just get that long screwdriver down. I like how this is also magnetized, and we'll just go ahead and start working that down. Okay, and you'll feel it tighten up. I don't want to torque it down all the way just yet. I'm going to get to the other side before I do that, and we're going to do the same thing for the other side. So the next thing will be to go ahead and mount the fan. So now the fan is going to be this right here. So let's go ahead and pop this guy out. Very nice. That's pretty cool. So this is actually going to go in this slot right here. Now in order to mount it, we're actually going to be using these fan clips. So these are tiny little metal clips, and we'll use that as brackets almost to be able to put this in place. Now we just want to make sure that we have this facing the correct direction. Okay, so how this is going to go, it's just like the fan that we can see here. This is actually a great way to be able to visualize what that should look like when you go to install it. So now we've got the fan bracket attached here, and as we can see, we've got the logo as well as the fan blades. They're facing the same direction as this outer fan. So now what we'll do, let's just go ahead and slide that down in there. And we're not forcing it, just going to gently slide it. Just going to wiggle it there. There we go. All right, nice. And then we can go ahead and install the fan clip on the other side as well. So what I'm going to do to try and make things a little bit easier is install one side at a time. So as we can see, this side actually came off. So I'm going to set that down for just a moment. So it's actually just mounted inside of these fins, these cooling fins. You can just find wherever it'll fit, and then we just want to make sure that the mounting bracket is snug when it fits in there. Okay, so I've got one fan clip in on one side. Let's go ahead and take a look at this side now. Okay, I got both of those fan clips mounted. It was a bit of a process, but we got it. So now what we need to do next is connect both of these fans. So now, as we can see here, this is the cable they've provided. This is called a Wye cable. So what we'll do is we'll connect both of these fans to these female ends, and then we can use this end to connect to the motherboard. Okay, and you'll hear it snap into place once it's connected, and we'll do the same for this one here as well. There we go. Just go ahead and clip both of those in there, make sure those are nice and tight, and then this end will go into the fan connector on the motherboard. We've actually got two of these connectors, so we don't necessarily have to use the Wye cable if we don't want to. I like how it's provided though, it's very nice. And we're just going to connect that in there. Okay, and that's it. So that's in there now. The fan connector is in. Alright, let's go ahead and move on to the next step. Alright, so the next step is going to be to connect to power. Let's go ahead and test to make sure that everything is working. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to pull up my power supply here. This is the Seasonic Focus, and then this is a semi-modular power supply. So what that means is that you've got some of these cables that come pre-attached to it. You have semi-modular and fully modular. With fully modular, you have the ability to customize which cables come attached to your power supply. So now in order to test to make sure that there is power coming to our power supply, this is a power supply tester. So we just want to connect this to this one here. This is the biggest one that's connected to the power supply. And you just want to connect that, plug in the power supply, and then go ahead and flip the switch to make sure that it turns on. If it does work and if it is receiving power, you'll notice that the fans on the back will actually start moving. So that's going to be what we've done to test the power supply. The next step is to go ahead and put this into our case. After we've checked to make sure that our power supply is working correctly, is going to be to mount what we have on our motherboard into the case for the computer. Now in this instance, I've got this opened up. There's panels that actually cover the sides of the enclosure. You can use the screws on the back of the case to take out these panels. This is going to open up the case for the computer, and as we can see, there's a nice space for us to be able to put down the CPU. Now as far as how that's going to work, the case that you have, this is going to be individual to your specific computer case. It's going to come with accessories, and we're going to use those to be able to mount our motherboard. So I'm just going to take all these out here. It comes nicely packaged in individual bags. But this is what we're going to use to get all that done. So we've got quite a few screws, and it's even labeled here on the back. So it makes things pretty simple. Now that we've got the case opened up, the next thing we'll do is go ahead and install the standoffs for the motherboard. Now these standoffs are going to be copper colored like this here, and then we'll also take care of the I/O shield, so we'll just put that on the back. So I'll go ahead and take care of that, and we'll move on to the next step. Okay, so now that we've got those in place, the next step is going to be to install our motherboard. So now this, what I like to do is just hold it from the top CPU cooler. Just prevents from having to touch anything here at the bottom. And what we're going to do is just go ahead and align those holes with the screws that we had put in to connect it to the case. I'm just going to gently sit that in there. I'm just going to do my best to kind of get all these cables out of the way here. Okay, so now we've got the motherboard positioned inside of the case. The I/O shield gave me a little bit of trouble, and as you can see, this project is literally blood, sweat, and tears at this point. But so once you get that positioned, you're going to use the hardware that's remaining to go ahead and fix the motherboard inside of the case. I'm going to go ahead and take care of that here. We've got the motherboard now installed inside of the case. So now the next thing that we're going to do, let's go ahead and mount our drives into the brackets here for the case. So I'm just going to go ahead and flip this upright. This is always just a good test to see and make sure that everything is snug. So yeah, it looks good. Looks like the motherboard is fitting in pretty snug. You can also see those connections here. I actually really like this case. I like how it came with a bit of cable management already ready to go. I think that's awesome. But then what we've got here down at the bottom is the drives for the bay for our hard drive. So now what we're going to do, I've went ahead and taken this out. This is one of the brackets here that's available for us to attach this drive. And then you just want to line up the holes where you're able to connect the drive with the bracket. And then you can use the hardware that's provided. I'm just going to quickly do that here. Okay, so I went ahead and used the hardware that was provided. I've attached the brackets to the hard drive. So now before I go ahead and install this bracket inside the case again, what I wanted to do is go ahead and bring up the power supply and get that connected to our motherboard. So I'm going to quickly do that here, and we're going to go through the connections for everything. So before I install it, I'm going to go ahead and just get the connections out of the way. That way it's a little bit easier when it comes time to actually putting it back inside of the case. So what we're looking at now, I've got the power supply cables running inside through here. I'm going to see if I can show you. So this is the power supply. I went ahead and positioned it where it should be. And then this case is great because it actually gives you cable management already designed inside the case. So I just fed these cables through from the enclosure as well as through the power supply. And these are going to come around to the other end in order to connect to the motherboard. So what I'm going to do next is fix this power supply shield on the back, and then we'll go ahead and connect all the cables to the motherboard. So what we'll do is go ahead and drop in this hard drive down here. Just want to go ahead and gently just line that up, and then you should hear it click into place. There we go. Okay. Now as far as the cables that plug into it, so it's going to be the SATA connection cables. We're going to want to find that in our cables here. So I'm going to quickly do some digging, and then we'll go ahead and connect all the cables to our motherboard. So one thing that I completely missed was the power adapter cable for the hard drive. So I just realized that what I'm having to do here is go through and figure out the SATA connection for the hard drive. I'm going to take out the power supply again, get that connected. It's going to be this one right here. And then I can see that it's been plugged into the hard drive. There's quite a few connections that came on the cable with the power supply. So if you do have multiple drives, it's great. You can connect multiple drives to the power supply. But in this instance, for cable management, I just went ahead and tied those up, connected the SATA cable, and this end is going to go into the power supply. So I'm going to quickly take that out, reinstall it, and then we'll go ahead and pick up. So it's definitely coming together. As far as what we're looking at here, this is going to be the setup so far without any type of cables connected to the motherboard. That's going to be the next step. I wanted to spend some time to also talk about cables. So now when it comes to building a PC, a lot of the cables that you have are going to be very similar across the board. Now there's going to be some minor differences. It does vary depending on the case that you're using. Depending on your hardware, you know, your motherboard, your power supply, etc. But for the most part, there's going to be cables that you're going to find are very similar across the board. So I just wanted to talk briefly about some of those. First and foremost, we've got this 24-pin cable. This is going to connect from our power supply to our motherboard. There's going to be a 24-pin connector that you'll see in my instance here on the side of the motherboard. I know it's hard for you guys to see from that camera angle, but it's going to plug into the motherboard here on the right hand side. So what I've done already is I've gone through the process of feeding the cables through the case so that it's very easy when it comes time to connect it to the motherboard. After you've got this 24 pin connected, there's going to be another cable from the power supply. That one is going to be at a different position, and you'll see it's specific to your own motherboard. I'm not sure if it'll show up here from the camera angle that we're at, but the other cable is an 8-pin cable from the power supply. In my instance here, it's on the opposite side of the 24 pin, so I've got that cable as well. One thing to keep a note on with this cable is that it actually has two individual pieces. So you've got two connectors, both with 4 pins each. That makes up the 8-pin connection to the motherboard. Those are going to be the cables that are connecting from our power supply. And next, this is going to be a USB cable. So you've got, there's a little connection that you can see on your motherboard. It's going to look a little bit different depending on your model, but this is going to be the cable that we connect to the motherboard to allow for the USB connectivity from our case. So that's this one right here. Now the fans that we have mounted on our CPU cooler, I have a Y bracket that's connecting both of those fans, and then there's a connection on our motherboard that allows us to connect to that. Let me see if I can unplug that just real quick, just to show you. But essentially, so the Y connection looks like this, and you've got this connector right here which will connect to your motherboard. So I have that there, and then another thing that we have that's specific to the case that I'm using, so these are all going to be the cables that came with the case. And what we're looking at, I've got another cable that looks just like the ones from our CPU fan. That's going to be the fan that's mounted on the case. So I've got one of those. And then this right here, this is all kind of grouped together, what we can see here. So these are all the cables that will connect to the various buttons on the case, the LED. So you can actually see on there, it'll show you one's power switch, one's power LED positive and negative. This one right here is hard disk drive, LED. This one right here is the HD audio, so if you want to connect your speaker or your microphone. With these cables, you want to make sure you're referring to the owner's manual for your motherboard. It's very important that you connect these cables to their corresponding connections and that there's no misplaced cables. If you were to misplace a cable, you're going to run the risk of damaging your motherboard, mainly because you've got two different terminals here. You got positive and negative. So you just want to make sure that you're looking at your motherboard and finding out exactly where those pins need to go. So these are what we're looking at here from the case. And then lastly, we've got the SATA connector from our hard drive. So that is going to plug into the side here. I'm not sure if you can see it from the camera angle. It's pretty deep in there. But you'll see a little SATA connector on the motherboard. It should say SATA. So that's going to connect to our hard drive. So now that we've gone through some of these cables that we're going to be looking at, let's go ahead and get this connected, and then we're going to go for our first test run. Alright, so I've went ahead and connected all the cables. As we can see, I've got the motherboard inside of the case. It's mounted. It's ready to go. I just need to go ahead and fire this on. We're going to do a test to make sure that everything's working. So now I just wanted to show you here real fast. So the way I've got it done, so I just did a bit of cable management. The case that I'm using right here has this slot which allows you to feed the cables through from the case and connect it to the motherboard. So that's what I did here, and then we can see this right here. This panel just has all those cables such as the power button, the power LED. We've got the audio cable on the left side, that's this one right here. And then we've also got some fan cables. I've got one connected here, got a couple more fans connected right here. So we've got the power, one of the power cables right here, and then there's another power cable that's right here behind the cooler, the CPU cooler, so that's going to be that right there. Now that one was a little bit tricky just because of the size of the CPU cooler, so you might have to do a little working around with some of your configurations, you know, just depending on what type of size case and the motherboard that you're using. But yeah, that's what we've got so far. So the next step is to power it on. Fingers crossed, let's see how it does. Alright, so we've got the computer connected to power, and I've got it connected to the monitor. So what I'm going to do next is press the power button. We're going to check to make sure that everything is working. Okay, so far I see the power LED, we've got the fans coming on. Okay, so far so good. I'm going to go ahead and check out the monitor. Let's see if we get anything come up. All right, very nice. So as we can see, we have the logo for the motherboard come up. What's going to happen next is we're going to be moved over into our BIOS. So from our BIOS, we're going to need to install an operating system. And in this instance, for the stake pool, we're going to run Linux. So that's the next step for us, is going to install Linux and go ahead and get the stake pool up and running. And what it's asking for now, it's saying reboot and select proper boot device or insert boot media. So this is exactly what we need to see. Essentially, it's looking for an operating system. So that's the next step. Things are looking good. I will see you guys there. All right, you guys. So I got the stake pool build up and running. Very exciting. As you can see, it took quite a while. I ended up needing a shave. But nonetheless, very excited to let you guys know that everything is good to go as far as hardware. I'm currently going through the process of installing the Ubuntu operating system. So as far as the software side of things, stay tuned for more content related to that. This was an overview of the process to get the hardware build put together. Now, in my particular instance, I ended up needing to replace the motherboard. So it turned out, after going through some troubleshooting of the PC not working the first time around, replacing the motherboard is what ended up fixing that issue. So if you are interested in building your own stake pool, just know that things like that happen. You'll have to go through some troubleshooting. In my instance, I had to replace the motherboard. So it's definitely possible that you're not going to get it up and running the first time around. Just be ready for that. But once you do, it's a very exciting experience. So anyway, guys, I hope you do enjoy this content. I hope you did find some value from this video today. If you did, be sure to drop a like for me. It lets me know that you're enjoying it. And if you haven't already, be sure to hit that subscribe button. I want to keep you guys updated and informed with Cardano content, news, building a stake pool, staking. All of that is here at Kaizen Crypto. If you do have any questions about anything that we've talked about here in this video today, let me know down in the comments section below. I'd love to hear from you guys. All right, everyone. I really do appreciate you watching. Thank you so much for sticking around. And I will see you guys in the next video. Take care.